Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cap and Gown. This is season 5, our last episode of the season. I'm Rachel Phillips Buck, VP for Student Success at Ferris Resources, joined today by Matt Boisvert, our president. Hey, Matt.
Hi, Rachel. It's great to be with you on, the last one for the season.
I feel a little bit like I used to when I was a student and we got to this time in the semester. You know, it's like you have some finishing tasks that you have to do and you're like, don't just go outside and have a picnic all day long because the weather is beautiful. A little bit of spring fever.
Still have some work to do, still have some projects.
Yeah.
But yeah, Easter is always that time where it's like, okay, we're close.
You know, it's funny, Matt, because it's like Easter signals that. And then I don't know about you, but do you remember like in your master's program, Thanksgiving was so hard? It like signified like you have a break, but you have 10 papers that are due at the end of this Thanksgiving break, right? But Easter is like, okay, all right, we're about wrapping it up. We're almost done. So that's really fun. We actually have a really fun show today because we're going to do a semester, or I guess a season recap. We're going to remind you of some of the guests that we've had and some of the things that we've talked about. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the fact that our theme for the year is intentionality. And so it's really fun to see in some of the guests that we're going to talk about just how that's just been underlined in our conversations throughout this year already. And to just remember back to some of our great shows. So I'm very excited.
Yeah. All right. So we've got a lot of content, but let's go, Rachel. It's time.
For State of the Union?
It's time for State of the Union.
I like to keep Bailey on her toes. She's never heard Matt say it's time for State of the Union before.
I didn't actually say it. I led you to it, but I'm ready.
All right. I have a very confusing article that I'm going to talk to you about. This is out of the Washington Post. So I'm just going to tell you what this article says because I'm legitimately confused by it. Okay.
Yeah.
So the headline is student loan grant programs suffer outages after education department cuts. That's the headline. Okay. So it goes on to talk about, it says the first sentence is the education department's financial aid apparatus is cracking after the Trump administration imposed sweeping staff cuts, with some fearing that further deterioration could make it harder for students to secure the money they need to attend college. Which, to be clear, we don't need that business. We've already been through a FAFSA fiasco. We don't need any of that. Like, that's very stressful, right? Okay. Then they say, earlier this month, it took this team at Northwest Missouri State University almost a day to log on to the Student Aid Internet Gateway, which is the portal that the Education Department uses to send colleges electronic files, including processed FAFSA forms. Okay, so it took a day. And then a couple of days later, it happened again. It took them about 2 hours to be able to log on. The man who's working there said other systems have become increasingly difficult to access, a database that houses student loan information, another that handles the origination and disbursement of loans, and the Pell Grants for undergraduates with exceptional financial aid. So he's like, hey, we've had to wait to get into those portals. Then it says the Education Department spokesman says there have been no prolonged outages in the past 60 days. And the article is like, but we don't really know what prolonged outages is. So maybe 2 hours doesn't count. Maybe a day doesn't count. We're not sure what that says. And then it goes on to say, back when online access to these forms went in and out for 4 hours the day after all these layoffs occurred, everyone was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a nightmare. What's going to happen? Like, you let all these people go and now no one can get into the forms. But since that incident, there have not been any major FAFSA disruptions. So I'm already confused about what we're talking about. And then it goes on to say 2 former employees said that before the staffing cuts, the oversight group had a backlog of 1,600 applications from colleges trying to become or remain eligible to participate in aid programs. Also, another arm of the group, which analyzes schools' finances, had a backlog before the staffing cuts of 800 cases, according to the testimony of Chris Miller, who ran the Atlanta division that closed. So I think what I'm taking from this is they just are not doing a great job there. And there's some shakeup, but it's just more of the same, right? Like, we're not confused that FAFSA has had problems and it's continuing to have problems.
Yeah, I don't know why we have to assign blame to different administrations. I mean, the FAFSA debacle, that's clear, and that's the prior administration. My main point would be like cause and effect. Is there correlation or causation here, right?
And who cares if students can't get their loans, whether it's because you don't have enough people or your systems are jacked up, then you need to fix it, right?
That's what we're talking about today, right? Fixing your systems.
Yeah, let's fix your systems. Okay, I don't know what that's about. I'm just telling you, I read it and I was like, maybe we should discuss this because I'm not sure what that's about.
I think it's a good headline. It's a clickbait kind of article or confirmation. Like, if wherever you are, you'd be like, oh, well.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Matt, there's another article in Higher Ed Dive, where they ask 6 higher education experts to reflect on COVID's sector-wide influence. So I think it's worth a read. It's pretty interesting. You have people from all different either higher ed or higher ed adjacent industries talking about what they're seeing. The 2 that I want to highlight are, first of all, I know that we all know this, but I think it bears like articulating clearly, which is one effect is the pandemic made online learning mainstream in a way that was unimaginable in 2019. A global generation of learners who would likely not have experienced this online classroom now understand its potentials, pitfalls, and power. So I think that's super cool to articulate. And just to remember, we were talking to someone the other day, Matt, we've used Zoom forever, from way before the pandemic, when we would do demos or we would have meetings with schools.
Can I just do a side note on that? It was cute. Yeah. Back in the day when we first adopted Zoom, we actually had a salesperson
who sold it to us.
She was in a cubicle. Like, imagine this. For those of you listening, this really happened. She's in her cubicle and she's like, Ann, check this out. And she pulled up a green screen and then she changed her background. And it was like, oh, we're sold now. So we could be anywhere. We could be on the beach. If we have a little, we could change our background.
Super novel.
Really novel.
And what I was going to say is it used to be that we had to schedule 30 minutes before we would have one of those meetings so we could walk our clients through, like, you have to install it. You have to make sure you have a camera. Can you test your sound? Right? And now it's like, of course, everybody knows how to use that. But that came directly out of that experience with COVID. So I think it's pretty interesting.
When you're pushing a faculty member who's been around for 40 years into Zoom,
yeah.
I mean, the amount of lift that required for some. Yeah,
for sure. And, your LMS. So it's like Sherry and I were talking about last week. It's like a whole different experience. You got to get your course in. You got to set everything up. And so that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing that happened. Other perspective that I wanted to share, this is coming from Patrick Lane, who's the Vice President for Policy Analysis and Research at Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. He says the bigger impact on higher education may come from the learning loss and chronic absenteeism in K through 12. Oh, yeah. Students who were in early grades when COVID started are facing uphill battles and probably will not make up that ground by the time they finish high school. And it reminds me, when we had Dr. Allison Ash on, and she was talking about, depending on where you were in your life in COVID, that's what you missed. So if you were in kindergarten, you have a gap in what you learn in kindergarten, 6th grade, 8th grade, 11th grade. And I was saying to you, Matt, like, the impact in higher education is not going to be done until those that were born in 2020 have made it all the way through the college pipeline, right? Because everyone between newborns in 2020 all the way up had some gap that we then have to figure out how to fill, either academic or social or psychological, right? There's a gap.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about that, how infants they're trying to read their parents'
Yeah.
body language with, I mean,
Yeah. I'm
there's
trying
so much that we take for granted. I mean, not really. Like in my communication class, what was it? Like 90% of communication is body language, 10% is verbal, right? We knew that. So, but when I think about, so what, our daughters were in second grade when it hit. And so third grade was you're going to school, but you have a mask and there's like distancing and all of that was figured out. So yeah, you think about what third grade for me was like one of my favorite. It was a turning point for me. Mrs. Link was my teacher. It was a turning point.
But Matt, you also have to think about, depending on where you are in the country, that you either missed out on March, April, May, you weren't in school, and then came back, which is what they did in our community, or you weren't in school for the next 2 years, which is what happened in some communities, right? So it's it's so
King County, Washington,
yeah. So anyway, I think it's really interesting, and I think it reminds me of you know how every year they do the like freshmen coming in this year have experienced like they've never not known not having smartphones, whatever that is. I think there has to be like a appendix to that, which is they were this old when COVID happened, and here are some things that they likely missed in their experience.
I think it's so important for universities to start thinking now about the developmental challenges, things that have happened with the K-12 and that. So we've talked a lot about the enrollment cliff, but with this development, I don't know, that would be a cliff. Really, that would be a cliff. And just thinking about from a behavioral, so I mean, we've talked with middle school teachers. I just was talking to a former middle school principal about like, man, it's hard today because a lot of these children did not receive the kind of feedback that they needed when they were in third grade.
Yeah, for sure. We probably could do a whole cap and gown on that. Just thinking about
we've talked about it a lot, but it's just reinforcing. Like, I think it's smart for a university to think about how can we leverage, like, I don't know, some of our master's programs in social work and counseling, and just develop some good things for the local school districts to support the development of these children.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because the next article is talking about the University of Nevada, Reno, who created this experience. They were like, what we are finding is that a lot of our students are struggling to meet expectations in the classroom, including keeping pace with rigorous courses and engaging with faculty members, likely because they're missing some of these developmental gaps, right? They didn't have to do those things, and so they are lagging in where they should be. And so they created a 1-week pre-college program that introduces learners to various support resources, peer mentors, and college level courses. So it's called Nevada Fit. It's 1 week. It starts with students moving into their residence hall, and then they group them into 2 categories. They have first organized by academic departments, which is a camp. And then they have a smaller group of students and a peer mentor, which is called a pack. Often organized by major. So you're getting to meet the people that you are going to spend your college career with. They are making a distinction. It's different than your traditional orientation where it's like, hey, here's all the information about your academic support classes and your housing placement and stuff. They're like, actually, we really want them to live out a college experience. So they are putting them in classes, getting them to participate in study sessions, learning to navigate campus spaces. They get 1 college credit if they participate. And they put them in a math course, which gives them some early indication about academic readiness, right? So I was telling you when we were talking about this earlier, can you imagine doing a stoplight in that class before the student even starts that you would say, here's a population of students that we have to be really intentional about, like even earlier than 3 weeks, right?
You remember we did a presentation at a conference, and then the next year, someone who had been in that presentation came back to us and said, hey, I took your advice, and in this summer class, I implemented a stoplight, and it changed everything. It's such a good practice. But then thinking about this group, first of all, backing up, I love what UNR is doing. It's a great, every campus should consider developing this. At least you said it's a 1 week.
1 week.
Course,
yeah.
And 1 credit hour. And it's just an introduction for, hey, you belong. Yeah, this is a place where here is your pack. I love that. They must be like wolves or something.
Yeah. Well, the data really is bearing it out. So they did a 2024 pre-assessment and post-assessment last year. They found the number of
pre and post.
I do love a pre and post. They found the number of students saying they felt confident or very confident going into their first semester grew 15 percentage points after they completed Nevada Fit, which is amazing. 2/3 of the students who hadn't yet identified a major picked one by the end of the week. I love that. And then this is really remarkable. Students who participated in Nevada Fit have a 5 to 10% higher retention rate compared to their peers who didn't participate. So, wow, that's amazing. Why wouldn't you do that all day long? Now, I will say the article says it's a pretty heavy lift. Like they have a director of this. They have peer mentors. They have a lot of students who are participating in it. So there's a lot. It's not like you can just do this. But I think if you think about a return of 10% increase in retention, you can find the budget for it, right?
I think there's a lot of things like that. So how many students participated in that week?
I don't know.
But you could run the numbers for your campus. I mean, if you had 100 students participate, and so you increase retention 10%, that's 10 students. That's a lot. I mean, that's, $150,000 of revenue retained. There's a lot of, you could do an ROI on that.
Well, and I think also if you think about after the fact, like if you identify those students early and you acclimate them to academic success, then after the fact, you don't have to have as many success coaches and tutors and that sort of thing because you've done that work up front, right?
And these students become champions of your culture. And so when they have similar students around them, they will lift and move those students who might be on the fence or even kind of on the negative, not sure I want to be here, move them quickly over into okay, this is a place where I belong too.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of turn into guides, right? Because they're like, oh, I know about this. Come with me. I'm going to show you how to whatever the thing is. So,
and they become leaders on campus. It's just that early introduction is so undervalued. So great article.
Yeah. All right. I know you're going to love this one. This university, College of Staten Island, SUNY, they have created a career-infused degree map. So this actually came out of their computer science area. And now I think every single department on their campus does this because they've seen such an incredible increase in career success. So basically, their goal was to remove guesswork and ensure that every student leaves with not just a degree, but tangible career readiness. Okay. So they created this career map where on the left in blue is your academic requirements. And then on the right in orange is your career readiness requirements. So they're like, for example, in your first semester, you need to create a Handshake account with Career Services, start building a basic resume, review your major required courses, join a student club, and apply for a first-year mentoring program, and then they name all of them. So that's your first semester. Your next semester, create a LinkedIn account, explore career options for computer science majors, attend a hackathon, game jam, or coding competition, create a GitHub account, and attend professional development worksheets. And it just goes all the way through until it gets to the very end, which is like apply for jobs, secure your references, make sure that you are alerting your LinkedIn network that you're now looking for a job. It's so smart, Matt.
It is.
And I know that this is something that is near and dear to your heart.
Actually, what I was going to say, what it made me think of is Rebecca and Tim Johnston, I'm sure this brings back some great memories of Fast Track and what we did in the graduate success development team at our old institution. Because I mean, it really is a smart alignment between the you're in a major, but the goal isn't the major. For some students, maybe it is, but it's really like professional development, getting you ready for your career. And so having that, I never put it side by side, which is so smart. It's almost like you're going to do these things, but you have to do these things to get to that next level. It's so smart. So
I really like it. Yeah, because I think it's a good way to negotiate and navigate that conversation we're always talking about, which is like college is good for college's sake. And also I need to get a job, right? And so I think when you put those two things side by side, you're like, yes, you're taking English literature courses, but also you're doing these other things that are going to press you forward to be able to get a job. Matt, listen, here's the results. Between 2021 and 2024, career outcomes flourished with 43% more computer science students participating in internships, which we know is a great thing to have on your resume, as well as a great thing to experience. And 144% increase in the number of students landing a full-time job upon graduation. Also, their starting salaries increased 34% compared to previous baselines. Yes, please. There's another one where if you want to talk about ROI, like everybody should be doing that and just saying like, we are going to, from the time you are a freshman, start your career readiness so that when you're ready to graduate, you are just the perfect package for somebody to want to hire you.
Which goes back to, I was thinking about just on the enrollment side, if you put this in front of parents and say, here's what they're learning, here's how we're preparing them, sold.
Yeah.
Like that then enhances the value equation of why should I go to your institution? So
for sure. Yeah. All right. I have two more for you. One is, I'm not going to dive into it, but I really think it's worth reading. It's from Inside Higher Ed. It's called Practical Skills for Student Crisis Response. So this author talks about, he goes in for a job interview and they're like, hey, can you tell us about a time when you supported a student in crisis? And he starts talking about, he's a licensed clinical social worker in Army Special Operations. And so he starts talking about this time a student was in crisis. And as he's talking, he just sees everyone's face kind of go still. And they're completely overwhelmed with this scenario that he is describing having to support. And he's like, what I'm telling you is not even the worst of it. It's not the hardest thing I've ever been through. It's just like, and he's like, oh, actually, people don't know what to do when a student's in crisis. They feel paralyzed and they actually don't know what a good response is. So he goes through a long list of things about things that you should do if you're faced with a student crisis.
Okay.
And his the two things that I'll summarize for you are, first of all, you have to be a non-anxious presence. Like, people who are feeling overwhelmed and in crisis don't need you to take those feelings and magnify them. They need you to like take a grounding breath and be like, okay, it's okay. Here's what we're going to do. And then we're going to do this. And then we're going to do this. Right. So what they need is to feel confident and secure that you are the person who's going to help them manage this. And he's like, remember, you're not in crisis. This isn't your crisis. Your job is to be calm and steady and stand next to the person who's feeling overwhelmed.
That might actually be the best advice for any of us in higher ed, because so I was just going through some scenarios I think we've all experienced in higher ed, a student who is in crisis and how you respond, especially if you really like the student, right?
Yeah.
How you do take that on as your burden, but to step back and have that as your first response is like, I'm not in crisis. The student needs help. And I might not be the right person to help this student.
So to that point, his other thing is you have to ask for help. You have to have a team. You can't do it all by yourself.
Yeah.
You need to have other people around you, because part of it is just like, we need to be able to talk about this and say, what do we think we should do? It's why your care team is such a good resource, because you should be used to having that conversation around students who are not in crisis. They're having a difficulty, right? But they're not in crisis. And then when you identify a student who is in crisis, you already have this trust, this conversation, this shorthand way of communicating about what's happening. So I really appreciate your team needs to know immediately that a crisis is happening, so that then they can step in and be a good support to you and provide whatever resource they have.
I wonder how many schools actually have actually go through like the kind of scenarios that were horrifying to that group.
Yeah.
Because if you can handle those kinds of crises, then everything else kind of seems more manageable.
You know, Matt, it makes me think about, I know in a lot of different scenarios, I know that schools do this, right? Where it's like you do a tabletop exercise of you have a shooter on campus. But I think you could do a tabletop exercise of like, a student is having this crisis and what do we do? And how do you respond?
First of all, I didn't mean to laugh about a shooter on campus. That's not what I was laughing about. I was thinking about a tabletop discussion about a PR incident.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
That's normally what they talk about, is like, oh, we got bad press. How do we handle it?
Somebody tweeted this. What are we going to do about it?
So
for sure.
I was thinking about a situation there. So I'm definitely not laughing about a shooter on campus.
But any of those, like, practice it. Who's on your team? What are we supposed to do? How do we talk about it? Right. So I think it's a good idea. All right. I have one last thing. I feel like we're going long on State of the Union because last week I had to talk to myself about it. So it was pretty short because I was just,
Oh, you just have Matt's all pent up. I've just been so eager to get back in the game.
Yeah. All right. The last one I have, I think, is really exciting for a couple of reasons. So this is coming out of Paul Smith's college, where this man, whose name is AJ Boudin, it's French, so I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. He's a veteran, maybe so. He's a veteran, and he was pursuing a bachelor's degree in environmental science with a concentration in fish and wildlife management. And one of his professors was like, hey, you know so much about fishing. Would you lead an expedition for my kids and teach them how to fish? And he was like, yeah, of course. That's fun. So out of that, he created his own business called Battlefish Charters, which is like, come with me, I'm an outdoor guide, and I'm going to lead fishing for you or your family or whoever wants to come. Then he created Battlefish University, which is a small group of veterans who came to where he is and learned about how to start their own business. And then he started Battlefish Academy, which gives students in his academy a license and a certificate. The program is 15 credits. So we partnered with his institution, Paul Smith College, to do this. They do, in the classroom, they learn about principles of management, marketing, economics, business systems, and managerial accounting, so they can go back and have their own wildlife business. And then they spend 14 days in this 18-acre lot learning all sorts of things like how to tie fishing lines and navigate the wilderness and manage your client's experience. And it's all for veterans.
Cool.
And he's like, a lot of times veterans lose their sense of purpose when they come back. It's a really big struggle. So giving them control over a small business and entrepreneurship where they have all the tools that they need to go back to wherever they are and have these guide experiences is so incredible. And because it's 15 credits, they can actually stack those credits for an associate's degree or add them to a bachelor's degree that they're pursuing. And the GI Bill pays for all of it. So,
awesome.
So smart. I just love the teacher who was like, you know how to fish. Can you come help my kids learn how to fish? Thank you.
I know. All of that's awesome. I would have just loved that. Not qualified because I'm not a veteran, but that's a pretty exciting model. And again, when we're talking about enrollment, decline in enrollment, what an awesome program.
Yeah.
So all across the country to leverage what your veterans know. It may not be fly fishing or fishing. It could be, like McPherson with automobile restoration.
Yeah.
Whatever tapping into your veteran talent is
Yeah.
just genius.
I think it's remarkable. It's great. All right. Well, that is the State of the Union. It's our last State of the Union before we hop into summer and take a little sabbatical.
Yeah.
There's no telling what the State of the Union is going to be when we come back in August. Literally no telling, but I'm sure it will be interesting. Okay. So Matt, I want to do a recap of our 5th season of Cap and Gown.
Yeah.
So we created Cap and Gown right around the beginning of the pandemic because people were really hungry for just thought leadership and guidance on what was happening and what every different institution was doing, right? And we've done it now for 5 years. This season, we had a lot of guests. So historically, we started with Anthony Malcurie, where he joined me every time we did it.
Hotel Impossible fame.
Mm-hmm. But this season, because Braden, our director of operations, was like, give me the list of guests you want. And she worked super hard to get all of them. We've had so many amazing guests.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I want to remind you that we introduced you guys to a lot of members of our team because I like everyone we work with. And I want you all to know who they are and have an understanding of their story and why they're passionate about student success work. So you heard from James Langford, who was our CIO, who talked about this
episode 4.
He talked about having a sandbox for you to play and imagine in, to just be like, we need to be safe and we need to have protocol when it comes to technology, but also you want to be able to have this ideation and think about what's going on, right? So that was a really fun episode. You met Callie Menard, who is
Episode
such a
7.
fun. She just graduated. She's been graduated a year. So she talked a lot about just what it's like to not be in school anymore. And I have to tell you, we didn't get into it on that episode, but she has more hobbies than anyone I have ever met in my life and is so enthusiastic about everything she does. So that was a really fun episode to listen to.
I love how she's taken like all that time that she applied to her master's degree. And then when she finished, she's like, I'm going to keep that energy going into these other places.
Yeah. She has an Instagram account all about her baking. I think it's called Yellow Door Bakery. So follow her on Instagram, but she makes beautiful cakes and cookies and all of that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, she's not close to us, so she doesn't bring them to the office, but we maybe need to switch that up. So you got to meet Callie. You also met Cameron Branch, who does a lot of things on our team. She works on retention intelligence as well as helping our schools pick the right solutions for them. So that was really fun. And I don't know if you remember, Matt, but she talked a lot about people calling her out for leadership roles, saying to her like, hey, I think you can do that. And she's like, okay, well, I'll try it. And then she would be successful. And then someone else would say, I think you could do this thing. And then she's like, okay. And that whole mentorship, leadership piece, how she just trusted people to know her and call her into leadership roles. And then she was really successful. It was super fun to listen to.
Yeah.
And then the last member of our team that you all met was Viva Gore just 2 weeks ago. And that was a really fun conversation because I think it uncovered for our listeners Viva's brain as the director of retention intelligence and how she's really looking for actionable data and looking to highlight groups of students for you to pour your resources in so that you can increase their student success. So that was a really fun one because I don't know that our listeners are always proficient in the data piece. And so she just speaks a different language, but she does it with such helpful context that it allows practitioners to take her work and then put that into practice and action, right? So
awesome team.
Yeah, really fun to introduce you all to them. We still have a couple of outlying members of our team that you all haven't met yet. So next season I will get them on, but I always appreciate the ability to speak to them in different episodes. All right. The other thing I want to remind you of is this season. Do you remember the theme for our season? So we've got a lot going on. We have like our year-long word, which is intentionality. But our theme for season 5, do you remember what it was? It's spring. It's about spring.
It's your favorite tree. It's the redbud.
It's the redbud. And the reason is because we talk about that in the dead of winter when everything is bleak and sick season. The red buds are the harbinger of spring, and they give us a glimmer of hope about what's to come in terms of everything's going to come back and it's going to be green and it's going to be beautiful. And so this season, really starting in the fall all the way through, is about thinking how things are going to continue to grow and change. And this idea that we are not the same as we were before the pandemic. But what I've seen, Matt, is so many of our practitioners, they have been able to return to their work more like what they knew beforehand, right? We're not doing quarantine and, quarantine lunches and all of that kind of stuff, but we're more in the rhythm of the academic year, which we really love. So that was the theme for this season. Anything you want to add about that?
No.
Okay. So let's go back to episode 2. Dr. Sherry Woosley is one of my favorites. We have her on really often. She's such a great partner because I can just tell her, like, we're going to talk about this thing, and she has tons to say about whatever random topic I pick. But in episode 2, we were talking about the importance of students understanding that a college degree is relational. It is not transactional. So this came out of an article from Inside Higher Ed, where if you set your students up to think their college degree is just a transaction, I come to class, you say a thing, I take a test, you give me a grade, right? You can get super confused because then you're like, are you a client? Are you paying me for a grade? What are we doing? Versus saying this is about relationships that you have here. So we have a quote from her. Can you read the quote from episode 2 that I've pulled out?
I don't necessarily need the information transfer. It won't help me 5 years from now when I need a whole different set of information. I need the relationships. I need to know how to think deeply, interact with people.
I love that because one of the things that I think we have uncovered is the trade of information is not what we're doing, right? This, like, I have this information, I'm going to give this to you, and then that's why you come to college. There's a lot of things that you can look up, teach yourself, learn. AI can help you, Google can help you, right? We've got tons of lectures from the best faculty on the planet that we can go and learn and listen to. This idea, though, that it really is about relationships, and that's what you're going to be talking about years and years from now when you're out of college, not this was an amazing lecture, although you might have 1 or 2 amazing lectures. I guess it's possible, right?
I just think I just had this conversation with a friend, that it's so important to teach for future learning that's where AI, and I think this came from the former CEO of Intel was speaking at one of our universities and talked about AI is an important tool, but being able to think ahead, being able to think what will happen in the future. AI is not as future oriented as you need to be. So
yeah, that's great.
That's good.
All right. I also want to highlight episode 3 this season, which was our summing up episode of our book from last year, which was Seek, How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. There it is. There's 2 quotes from this episode that I want to revisit. The first one is, you need to make sure you are always sharing from your scars and not from your wounds, which I really love. That's his guidance on, just like we were talking about in a crisis, you want to speak to things that you've processed and you've healed. And yes, you've been changed from, but they're not fresh. They're not like you're going to get overwhelmed by what you're talking about. So having the wisdom to know when to speak from your previous experiences that you've lived through and processed, scars, versus a woundedness that you have right now that can make it hard for you to be a non-anxious presence for somebody else because you're still processing and there's a lot of kind of transference there. So I think that's such good guidance. I think sometimes people just don't know how much to share. Like, is it appropriate for me to share these things? Can I talk about my experiences? And I think that's really helpful guidance on that one. Good. And then will you read the second one that I have from that?
When you're relentlessly pursuing a student and you're giving them every opportunity and you're saying, I can help you. And they're like, get away from me. Ignoring that red light is incredibly disrespectful to them because they are whole people and they get to make decisions.
Yeah. So I love this, Matt, because, sometimes we get the question. In fact, we were just on a campus and we got this question of like, what do you do when a student won't respond to you? When they are ignoring all your emails, when they don't want to come see you, when they, all of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, they get to make that decision. I think you can say, I'm going to stop bothering you. You get to choose not to accept my help. And a lot of times that's enough of a relief of pressure for them to be able to come and say like, actually, I really do need help. But we do have to give our students autonomy, and they're allowed to make their decisions and make mistakes, and they will recover from those, and they will be changed, and they will learn, and they will grow. And so it's not our responsibility to strong arm them into accepting our support. We're just providing opportunities and giving them that autonomy, which I really appreciate. Anything to add to that?
No.
Okay. Also want to talk about episode 5, Dr. Barrington Price at Dominican University. This is one of my favorites. They, remember, have a satellite campus that they started in a downtown Chicago area. And what I love so much about it is that they went to their community and said, if we start a college here and we have students living here, what kinds of things would you want them to experience? What kind of degrees should we offer? What kind of social resources should we give? And the community was like, this is what we need. And so they're like, okay, that's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to offer in terms of degrees and all of those support services. And the vision and the humility that it takes to go to the community and the students and say, tell me what you need, instead of being like, I know, I've been in higher education forever, here's what we're going to do, is just such a bright light, I think, in higher education space. And he had a really great quote about the cliff, the enrollment cliff that we're facing. Can you tell us what it was?
Yeah, Barrington said, when I hear things like the demographic cliff or there being a dearth of students, what that tells me is there's a loss of students of the type that have historically been advantaged to go to college. There's not a loss in the types of people who should be afforded access and opportunity for education.
It's so good. Yeah, it's so good. It's just, you have to broaden your perspective and you have to think about a new kind of student, veterans, non-traditional, right? Whatever that looks like, that those kind of students, how we're going to support them through to success. So we need to go visit Chicago this summer, and I want to go see this satellite campus. I think it would be so fun to just spend time with them and hear their experience. All right, a couple more for you. You remember we had Debbie Rutledge on from Rochester Christian University, and she kind of echoed what Barrington said when she was like, here's what she said. She said, I want to see more of the students who aren't sure that they are really college material find themselves in this environment and really discover that although I didn't necessarily excel in K through 12, in this environment, it's different. And learning is not what I thought it was. Which, if you pair that with Barrington's comment, it's like there are lots of students that we need to provide an opportunity for. And then Debbie is like, yes. And when they get here, we want them to feel supported and seen and like this is going to be different for them, which I think is such a great continuum of, Matt, you and I are always talking about if you admit them, you make them a promise that they can be successful. Right. And so opportunity without support is not good. Yeah. So this idea that you then have to create the scaffolding and the support processes to help those students to be successful and also renew their mind. I think that's what Debbie's talking about, right? Like, it's just be like, this is a different thing. You can be successful here because it's not your K-12 experience. And we've created this environment so that you will have everything you need to be successful, which I love. It makes me think of the school that we created their orientation. Remember, in one whole day was like, every message that I'm sending you is you have everything here you need to be successful. You are a scholar and we're going to support you in your scholar endeavors. It's great. All right. oh no, I have two more for you. So Sherry came back and we talked about Danger Brain, which is my new obsession. If you guys want to read our new white paper on From Danger to Daring, Bailey's put up the QR code there. Also our student success funnel. John's on there still.
Hey, John.
I just did a webinar with John from Missouri Baptist. So if you want to email him, there's his email as well. But what I want to say about this is that our students come in as freshmen and they're very guarded. And part of what we're trying to do is to move them from this danger, like looking for danger everywhere, move them then to this idea of how do you make connections? And so will you read what Sherry said? Sherry's like, you can come and you can kind of be guarded the whole time, or you can come and connect and make it relational.
Yeah, she says you can march through your 4 years unscathed. You for sure could do that. But at the end of that, all you're going to have is 4 years of blurriness, because all you were doing is trying just to manage. But when you show up as a freshman on your first day, this is the beginning of laying the groundwork for 4 years of connection and transformation.
Yeah. So I just think about our quiet students who are trying to keep their heads down and not be noticed. And that is indicative of being in danger brain, right? They don't want to stand out. They don't want to look around. They don't want to be seen because it's very risky to be that vulnerable. And part of what we want to do in those early stages of their time on our campus is say, this is a safe place for you to be seen and connected and vulnerable and make mistakes and risk. Because that's what we do for 4 years. That's how you're going to have this transformational experience.
Rachel, I'm just delighted. I'm thinking about my daughter, and if the faculty that she's had at her university knew who she was in high school, compared to where she is today, she is really invested in the relationships, this transformation. Being able to see that is so exciting. So I know that we've seen students who have taken that on. I think if you knew for some of your students where they came from, it would be neat for them to share that experience with incoming freshmen. So if you know of a student who really stepped out, who was pretty guarded in high school, and then when they got there to your institution, really stepped out and seized this opportunity, man, use them, take advantage of that story so that others can hear and grow from that.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's funny because then we had, after that in episode 13, we had Shara Hayes from George Fox. And I really love what she said because, she's no nonsense. One of the things she was talking about is people are like, you don't pull any punches with our students. And she's like, yeah, they want us to be authentic. They like me because I'm authentic and they know that I'm going to tell them the truth and I'm going to love them through whatever's happening, but I don't mess around. Right. Yeah. But she also said the word I love and hate at the same time is when a student says, I feel unsafe. What it usually boils down to is you're uncomfortable, not that you're unsafe, but you're uncomfortable because you're having experiences that you've never had before. And I highlight that quote to say this idea of moving from danger to daring is not moving from danger to safe, right? That's not what we're trying to do for our students. We're trying to move them to a place where they're willing to take risks, where they're willing to be brave and daring and experience things that they haven't experienced before in a community and in an environment where it's okay to be uncomfortable, to not know exactly what to do, and to be vulnerable and uncertain about what's happening. So I love this idea of teaching students that anxiety that you feel is not necessarily about feeling unsafe, but actually just about a novel experience and not being sure about what to do. You feel uncomfortable about that. Such good language that she shared with us there.
Awesome.
All right. So that is a recap.
What a great season, really.
I know. We've had some really, really good conversations. And Matt, I want to end our episode today by talking just a little bit more about our book for the year, which is Slow Productivity. This is not me. This is about Sherry and about slow productivity. But our episode last week is haunting me in a good way. Just thinking about, we talked about overhead tax where you just have a project, but actually it's 18 steps. We talked about legacy work, stuff that you've always done, even though you haven't stopped to assess whether you should continue to do it. All of those things, I think, give us a different frame on our work. And so the continuation of that chapter that I talked to Sherry with last week is all about this idea of slow productivity hacks and how you can sort of hack your schedule to give you time and space to have slow productivity, which is where you're not frenzied, but you're working at a normal pace. And so I just want to give a couple of those as we're ending this episode. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things we talked about last week was the ability to tie your schedule to places that you are, which works so well for campus, right? You go here to have coffee and then you teach your class and then you walk across campus, and it's just kind of this automatic flow. He also, though, talks about synchronizing, and he says you have to assess whether or not you are talking about tasks that need to be done or actually doing the tasks. And if you're talking about tasks that need to be done, like we have 15 emails going back and forth, or you're having this conversation on Slack, he's like, you have to move out of an asynchronous schedule into a synchronous schedule. Because if you're all in the office together, you can stick your head in and be like, hey, can you do this really quick? Yes, I can. Okay, thanks. 5 minutes. Versus all of the work that it takes to email back and forth and craft your words and blah, blah, like, please, right? So he has a great suggestion about meetings. He says, one, it's really helpful if you hold your own office hours for your team. So if I just said like, hey, every Thursday between 1 and 2, I'm on Zoom, you can come say hi to me or stop in and ask me a question or tell me a thing you have to tell me. And then we don't have to do that through email, which I really, really love. I think it works for students. It also would work for your team to kind of get those things settled.
And I think that's important that you separate those, because there's going to be an important meeting that happens with your peers, your colleagues, that you don't want a student to come and interrupt. You want the student to have their own really, focused time, but you don't want also your staff, those conversations to be interrupted.
Yeah. It's just the idea, like, where to find me. Like we would say, I have coffee on Friday at 1:00 every time in the library. This idea of holding that for your team is like, where to find me. On Thursday at 1:00, I'm in a Zoom, just sitting around waiting to see if anybody wants to come talk to me, right? Which I really love. And then he also talks about docket clearing meetings, which is a big team. So you might have like everybody who's involved in implementation, and the 5 of us come together and we just say, what's on the list? Okay, well, I have this thing. Okay, well, then can the 2 of you work on that project? Okay, great. Now what's next? This. Okay, well, the 3 of us will work on that project. And the idea is that you're assigning those things out instead of stumbling through who should we have and what's your plate look like and can I do this or am I overworked? So just having a group of people where you're just clearing the docket and assigning things out where everybody can kind of give their 2 cents on what their schedule looks like, I think makes a lot of sense too.
Good.
Okay. The last thing that I want to talk about is push and pull. So his example in the book is about a lab where samples get sent to this lab and there's like 10 steps and they're operating on a push process. So it's like, I'm step 1. When I'm done, I push it to you. My first sample, second sample, third sample, fourth sample. At the end of the day, my in basket is empty and you have 12 samples waiting for you, right? But your process, step 2, takes 3 times longer than mine. So at the end of every day, you are behind. At the end of a week, you have 700 things waiting for you and I'm footloose and fancy free. And I can go on and be like, I'm doing a great job. Matt's the problem, right?
The bottleneck,
right? So he says, actually, what's better is a pull system where I finish my 12 things and then I keep them in my box. And then you take those out when you're ready and push them up. And so what it uncovers is actually that when I finished my 12 for the day, I should be helping you with your work, because we just have this backlog of stuff that because it takes you longer, we need 3 more people on that process if we want to keep it. So it kind of uncovers these, it's like if you were to do your process mapping, you would say, well, Rachel, when you finish your 12, you have to help Matt with his work or we're never going to be able to move forward. Does that make sense?
Well, I've seen it in action, in the office when we're doing assemblies of different things. Like you and I are really good at batch processing,
Yeah.
but there becomes a time where we're doing this batch, but there is a constraint. The bottleneck is here. And so we have to actually put our energy into this. We have to relieve that constraint.
Yeah.
And so I've seen that in practice. There's a great kind of nerdy book that I read in grad school called The Goal. It's a nerdy book, but it's all about identifying the bottlenecks or the constraints to the process. It's also a marital relation book, so you might like it.
Yeah,
it's an interesting, but that perspective of just taking time, like you said, like a process map, taking time to identify really what is the constraint. The best example of that is Chick-fil-A. If you are in an area where you can watch a Chick-fil-A in action, they have perfected an understanding of their constraints. So how long it takes to get an order, how long it takes to deliver the food to the car, and all the work in the kitchen to get that food to you. So,
well, one really interesting application that Cal gives in this book is, we aren't all in those kind of processes, and we aren't all in charge of our colleagues and what our day looks like. And so he's like, you can actually approximate this pull process by thinking in your own work about an inbox, like here's a basket of all of the projects, and then here are the things that I'm actually working on. And he's like, the things that you have pending can be unlimited. You can have tons of people like, I need you to do this, I need you to do this, but you really should only be working on 3 projects at a time. You should be spending your time and your focus on those things. And when you finish one and you hand it off, then you can go get the next thing in the queue and put it in your basket. And so that you're always working on these 3 projects, right? And he's like, it's really helpful if you tell people. So Matt, if you're like, Rachel, I need you to write a proposal for a presentation for our workshop in ACSD, right? And he's like, you have to be really transparent and say, yes, there are 12 projects in my holding basket that are before that one. So I can do that one in 4 weeks. That's how long it's going to take me to be able to get that done. So I will get it done by the due date of whatever, the end of May. Is that okay? And then you're like, yeah, great. I just need you to get it done by the due date. And he says, sometimes we respond like the person wants us to get it done as fast as possible. But really what the person wants is to not have to think about it anymore, right? They want to give it to you and be like, you're in charge of this now. Please get it done by the time we need.
I'm getting kind of itchy because when someone asks me to do something, that's how I feel. Is like the clock has started and it's all on me. And it's so helpful to think about, just if you can be honest with what your load is, what you're, hey, when I try to look at, is this urgent, or is there do I have 3 weeks to work on this? Because that's what we're looking at is 3 weeks. What you can do is reduce everybody's anxiety just by having that communication.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And if you work in a good team, I don't want people to be stressed out, right? If I say to Z, hey, here's this thing that I need, and she's like, Rachel, I have 15 things on my plate. I can't even think about that till August. Unless it's an emergency, I'm going to be like, yeah, that's never mind. We don't need to think about that till August. And as long as you have good trust, the ability to say, this is the truth of my work. And if you want it to be excellent, I have to have time to be able to devote to that. And include all these other things, right, that I have to do. So I think it's such a helpful perspective, especially if you are the kind of person who feels some urgency when someone asks you to do something that could be self-imposed, and we don't want you to be overwhelmed, right? So I really love that. I'm going to think about ways in my own work to be transparent about that. He says that's the most important thing. And if you fall behind, if you said you could get it done by the date that you said, and then all of these other things are happening, if I came back to you and I'm like, hey, I still have 11 projects, they're taking longer, what can we do? Because I'm not going to be able to get that done by the deadline. Then we're problem solving instead of me just bearing the brunt of that, right?
I'm so bad at this.
Well, I'm calling you out on it. So we're going to have to figure out what to do. I think it is, like I said last week, like it's hard when you work with a team of people who want to be responsive and get things done as quick as possible, right? Sometimes you have to be like, slow your roll. It's okay. Don't have to worry about it. So Matt, I think this is such a fun way to end this season because summer projects are a thing that we love in higher education. Yeah. And thinking about how you rethink, retool, reshape your job so that you don't burn out, so that you can do really good work, so that in the fall you are set up for success. Because in the long run, we don't want you to work and so hard and so fast that you only have a semester left in you. I need you to be around for a long time. So I need you to pace yourself and think about how you take on projects. What is the overhead task? Reassessing those legacy projects and figuring out how to slow down and do excellent work instead of feeling really frenzied and overwhelmed with what you're doing. So I think it's a great way for us to end this season. And I think it pours right into our rhythm of the academic year, which is that in the summer, we get to rethink some of the things that we have done historically.
It's great. Thanks, Rachel.
I love it. Yeah. Thank you guys for spending the season with us, and we will be back in August. Happy summer.